alcoholism and addiction hit me very, very early, and it hit me very hard. And by the time I started using when I was 13, 14 years old, and by the time I was 19, I was living in an abandoned house and suffering from just profound depression and all of that, right? And I mean, I graduated high school with a 1.9 GPA. It was during the days when, these kids who everyone thought would be dead by the time they were 20, they just pushed them out of the school. And so I graduated with a D grade point average from high school. And so I've had to overcome a lot in my life. And most of the people who are in the field of psychology, and this may be a little bit unfair, but most of them just have not had to overcome that level of difficulty in life, right? Where there was a lot of a disadvantage very, very early in life, and struggling with addiction and depression and suicidal ideation, and just having a real broken sense of self. And so my unique voice, I think, is not only have I worked in the clinic with people who have struggled in their relationships and with their own sense of self, but man, I've had to overcome that myself in life in a big way. I mean, for much of my life, I struggled with just this deep internal sense of just like emotional collapse and a lot of PTSD kind of symptoms, right? Where I would have these just bizarre emotional flashbacks, and I would dissociate and make really, really dumb decisions based on kind of my emotional trauma. Because the reality is that there are just times, if you've experienced emotional trauma, there are just times when that kicks you out of the driver's seat of your own life and takes over. And now you become kind of a helpless passenger as you just are along for the ride of what all these emotions and all of that kind of stuff are doing. We just become flooded and we lose the ability to act with intent. And I know what that feels like. I've experienced it a lot. I've experienced having just these sudden visions of like somebody running up and stabbing me, or these just, incredibly just violent thoughts that seem to come out of nowhere. And I'm like, what the hell? And I know that this comes from very, very early childhood stuff, right? And when you experience those kind of things and you try to tell other people about those experiences, they look at you like, oh my God, I don't know what to do with that, but you're making me very uncomfortable. So either just shut up or you're going to have to go away, right? And I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to carry that kind of that secret, if we could call it that. It's not a secret because we don't want to tell. I mean, if anything, we want to be able to share what we are experiencing with somebody who will be there and help us work through that and remain present with us so we don't feel like a freak, right? And so when I was thinking about, about all of the videos that I've been producing, the book that I wrote, and another one that I'm writing on relationships, and all of that kind of stuff, it really came down to one thing. I want to help people who have experienced emotional trauma in their lives live the best life they can. And I have a unique perspective on this because not only do I have all of the professional credentials, which frankly are probably not as important as I have experienced and overcome these things myself. And during that journey, I have learned an awful lot of things about how to do this effectively. What is real, right? Not just, some of the things that sound good on paper, right? About you just have to learn to love yourself and things like that. It's like, dude, if it was that easy, nobody would be suffering from emotional trauma. If we could just make a decision to be happier, or just, stand in front of the mirror and do some affirmations, or, gotta just question our own limiting beliefs, dude, none of us would be struggling with the effects of emotional trauma. But it's just not that simple. It just isn't. We are so dehumanized by emotional trauma. Emotional trauma robs us of our humanity. It robs us of our sense of self. It robs us of our ability to experience connection in a way that feels close and safe and connected, right? And so my work going forward is all about how do we rehumanize ourselves, right? When we have experienced emotional trauma. That is what we all want. Anybody who has experienced trauma, this is a strong word. I can't speak for you, but most of the people that I've worked with, the one thing that they want is just to feel freaking normal, right? Is just to feel stable and just to not have all of this crap get triggered. And if it was a matter of just making the decision to be over that, we would have done that a long time ago. And instead what ends up happening is that people struggle with searching for answers and going to therapy and reading books and doing all of these things. And while some of it may work and some of it may work well, I mean, EMDR, for example, is a form of therapy that for PTSD-like trauma, it's absolutely fantastic. Attachment, relational kind of trauma that more affects our sense of self. These are two different kinds of things, right? There's the PTSD stuff, and then there's more the relational attachment trauma. Things like EMDR don't do as well for, things like our self-concept and healing that intense feeling of that there's something about us that is just flawed, broken, bad, sick, or wrong, right? That there is something about us that is just inherently flawed, that we are just like one of those people who is just meant to suffer, or who will never experience happiness, or who nobody will ever understand, or who nobody will ever love. And I mean, all of those thoughts have gone through my head. And I'm sure if you're watching this and you've experienced trauma, you've experienced some of those things too. And I think it's important to understand that a couple things about emotional trauma that I have just come to understand over the decades of really working on my own healing journey, as well as the clinical work that I've done, is that emotional trauma is never fully healed. That's just the reality of the situation, right? Excuse me. There is no point in our lives that we can unexperience the things that we have experienced in life, right? Those experiences change our neurology. They change the way our brain works. It changes how our brain processes memory, how it processes emotion, and all of that. And so the idea that trauma is something that you can just get over, or something that you can, just fully heal from, is just, it's not real. It's not true. And I think that the whole idea that somehow you can get over it only serves to further undermine our own sense of self, because it's like, well, if you can't just let that go, then there must be something wrong with you. Or, if you went through therapy and you haven't been able to be cured, then something must be wrong. And here, read this book. This helped my other friend. And if somehow now it didn't help you feel all that much better, then there must be something wrong with you, right? And the reality is that, reading books and going to therapy and doing a lot of things like, grounding and embodiment and, a lot of that kind of stuff. It's not that there is no value to that. I want to make that clear. There is value to all of that. But most people find, particularly those who have experienced a little bit more on the severe side of emotional trauma, and whether that was, came in the form of abuse and rape and violence and things like that, or it was in emotional abandonment or, constantly being shamed or whatever it is. If we've experienced more extreme forms of that, it's like a lot of these tools just become less and less effective as an antidote to the feelings and emotions that we experience and some of those trauma responses that we experience. And it can be super, super frustrating because it's like everything can be going well and then somebody says something or we smell something. We're in an environment or something for whatever reason just triggers some kind of emotional response in us. And then all of a sudden we feel ourselves flood. And we could see ourselves saying things and doing things and acting in ways. We could recognize that we're doing it, but we can't stop it. And oftentimes the things that we say and the way that we act will oftentimes push other people away and just further make us feel like a freak, that there's something just fundamentally wrong with us, that we are just crazy. And in most cases, obviously there's some people who have, true personality disorders and things like that. But in the vast majority of cases, people with trauma who do crazy stuff, it's not that you're like crazy per se. It's just that you have a normal brain, right, that has been exposed to some really bad stuff. And because of that, it has some of these compensatory mechanisms that is built up as a way of trying to allow you to survive in that chaotic and unhealthy environment. And now that you're in adulthood, a lot of those things can get triggered and come up, and they just definitely do not suit the circumstances, right? They are not the right responses. They are not appropriate responses for the circumstances, but we have them because our brain, the wiring in our brain was affected by some of the things we experienced earlier in life. And some of the things that we do, we later look back and are almost embarrassed by, or it can just be like, what the hell was I thinking? And I will give you an example from my own history. There was a time, I can't believe I am admitting this to the YouTube universe, but there was one time when I was sitting watching a movie, and all of a sudden I was just flooded with this sense of panic and this sense of urgency. Like I had no idea where it was coming from, and I had no understanding of trauma responses to put any kind of context around what I was experiencing. All I knew was all of a sudden I just felt flooded. I felt this sense of kind of panicky urgency that I just had to go out and do something. I had to get out of there. And so I went out and I took the front seats out of my car and dragged them over and threw them into a dumpster, and then walked back inside and plopped back down on the couch and watched TV, feeling better, like I had just accomplished something. Like, there was something that I, somehow that made me feel better in the moment. And afterwards, I'm like, I have no front seats in my car. And so I had to take an upside down milk crate and set it where the driver's seat should be and try to drive around like that. And I was driving like that for 2 years. And what's crazy about that is it never occurred to me while I was riding around with this milk crate as a seat. to get another seat. I mean, it just never occurred to me, because one of the things that emotional trauma does is it affects our sense of agency. It impacts our ability to feel like we can make some positive change in our life. Oftentimes we just feel very stuck and very trapped, and it's just like, oh, well, I'm just going to have to ride on a milk crate. This is just the way it is. There's no possible strategy that I could employ that to remedy this situation, right? It's almost like this real learned sense of helplessness that oftentimes accompanies, emotional trauma responses. I mean, that wasn't a week ago. I mean, that was many, many years ago when that happened. But I look back on that, and I mean, obviously you could go, ha ha ha, what a crazy thing to do. Man, you must have been totally insane. And it's like, or you could look at it and within the context of a trauma response. And it's like, wow, what a powerful thing emotional trauma is, where it can motivate us to end relationships, quit jobs, break things, sell stuff, take the front seats out of your car and throw them away. We just lose our ability to act with any kind of rationality, or because the rational part of the brain just goes offline when we get flooded like that. And when we are very, very early in our recovery on emotional trauma, it's like one of the things that I've found to be very, very helpful is just an understanding of what emotional trauma is. Because once I could say, oh my God, that's why I act so freaking crazy. That's why I do stupid stuff. That's why, there are just times when I like build something great, and then the next minute I just, for whatever reason, I abandon it, or I run from it, or I destroy it. And it's like, and I don't understand why. And once I understood a little bit more about emotional trauma and how emotional trauma hijacks our brain when we have those emotional triggers happening, and what that feels like and how that manifests, once I understood that better, then I had a better sense of how to navigate through those times when I get flooded, right? And when I get flooded now, which doesn't happen nearly as often and not nearly to the same degree, but still, I mean, I have a trauma brain, right? And so things like that still are going to emerge. But when they do, I'm like, oh, there it's happening. And I'm not going to necessarily believe what I'm thinking right now or what I'm feeling right now, because what I'm feeling right now is likely a trauma response, and it is not kind of who my normal self is, right? And even though I'm feeling a little bit frustrated, or I'm feeling flooded right now with a sense of hopelessness, or a sense of depression, or a sense of, everybody hates me, or whatever it is, right? Nobody's ever going to like me, kind of thing. And when I feel that now, I'm like, oh yeah, I get what that is, right? Because I understand how trauma shows up, and I know the things to look for. And so because I know what to look for, now I no longer have to allow my trauma responses to kick me out of the driver's seat of my the driver's seat of my life, right? So I can remain in control. I understand what's happening right now, and that I'm flooding from some stuff. But when I'm in that state, I have kind of a fire escape protocol, so to speak. It's like I have predetermined kind of how I'm going to navigate through those situations, so that I don't suddenly find myself being flooded, not understanding why, and not knowing what to do, and just allowing what I feel in the moment be the determining factor of how I behave and the things that I say, if that makes sense. And so the whole purpose of this channel, my YouTube channel and my Substack and my podcast and all of the work that I do, the books that I write, is all intended to do one thing. If you've experienced trauma, you're going to get triggered. It's just going to happen. That's never going to completely go away because your brain is different because of the trauma that you have experienced. But what will be different is how severe those reactions will be, right? And how that is actually going to impact and show up in your life. Because when I'm feeling triggered right now, I can just say, like, if I'm talking with my wife, I could just say, you know what? I'm feeling really triggered right now. And so I'm just gonna not say anything or do anything for a bit until this subsides and just allow that to kind of run its course. And now usually within an hour, it's over, right? Not like it used to be where triggers could last days, sometimes weeks, and be absolutely catastrophic emotionally. Because I've done enough healing and enough growing where now I still get triggered. Shit still kind of pushes the wrong buttons sometimes. But now I've got a way of navigating through those things where it has little to no effect on my life. And that's what I want to help you achieve as well. It's not like, it's like having addiction, right? There's no cure for it, but there is absolutely a way that you can navigate through your addiction and recover from it and not engage in the addiction itself and live a life that is completely happy and fulfilling. Right? It doesn't mean just because you were using daily or whatever that was and lost a lot because of it, your past doesn't equal your future. Just because you've struggled with stuff doesn't mean that you'll always struggle with stuff. You just need to learn some new skills, have some clarity around what is happening, and over time, you'll be able to really just kind of tone down the volume of some of those triggers, heal your sense of self, deepen your relationships with other people, and live a life that feels awesome. And my goal is to help you achieve that. So thank you very much for listening. I'll talk to you soon.